And just like that, after waiting for so very long, the first episode of Bleach the 1,000-Year Blood War arc is now behind us. And what did you think? Did you enjoy the episode? I know I certainly did. I thought it was a very strong return for the series, and I want to talk about that more in this video, my spoiler-free review of the first episode, The Blood Warfare, and my first ever review of the 1,000-Year Blood War arc anime. So like I said, this will be a spoiler-free video. We'll only really be discussing the episode that we just watched for all our anime-only viewers. Now, what do I mean when I say spoiler-free? Well, let me explain briefly how these reviews are going to work moving forwards. There will be no manga spoilers in these reviews whatsoever. They will all be saved for the in-depth spoiler talk videos that will come after these initial reviews. However, we will be talking about the episode itself in full. So in short, no manga spoilers, but full episode spoilers ahead. However, the next video that comes out on the channel will be an in-depth, detailed spoiler analysis of the episode, looking at it from the perspective of somebody who has read the entirety of the story yet to come. We'll be looking at the scenes they cut, the scenes they added, all of those changes and comparisons to the manga itself in the next video, so make sure you stay tuned for that one. And before we get started on the video, guys, if you haven't hit subscribe yet, make sure to do that now for more Bleach content like this every single week, and of course, more 1,000-Year Blood War arc anime reviews. And if you really enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a thumbs up as well to help support me and the channel. And if you want to take that support another step further, I do have a Patreon as well, where you can get videos like this one early, and you can support me for as little as $1 a month. To everyone who is supporting me over there on Patreon, as always, I want to say a massive thank you to each and every one of you. I really do appreciate it. So it still feels surreal to be able to say that we've just finished watching the latest episode of the Bleach anime, even after so many years, but that's the reality we live in. The 1,000-Year Blood War arc is now fully underway, and I'm extremely excited about that. You guys know that I love this arc. For all of its faults, I think it is fantastic, and I think it is Bleach at its most ambitious, for better or for worse. But I also think that that means as well that this might be potentially the most difficult arc of the story to faithfully adapt. There are so many characters to introduce, there's so much going on at all times in the 1,000-Year Blood War, and of course there is that massive central conflict that they absolutely have to get right as well. The tone of this arc is very important, the pacing is very important as well, and it all comes together to make something of a perfect storm, which I think is difficult to get right. With that being said, I think this first episode did a commendable job at introducing us to the story of the 1,000-Year Blood War and really setting the stage for the action to come, even though I think it could have maybe done a slightly better job at helping to wean people back into the universe of Bleach. So how would I sum up the first episode, The Blood Warfare, in a single sentence? Well, this episode is an exciting, fast-paced and action-packed reintroduction to Ichigo and the gang as a brand new enemy emerges from the shadows to confront him, as well as the Soul Society directly, declaring war on them all. And that's a very exciting prospect and a great way to get an arc going. Let's begin this review by looking at the story, as it feels like we've covered an awful lot of ground already. The very beginning of the episode is really all about setting the stage. It's showing us that trouble is brewing, hollows are being killed en masse across the country, and the Soul Society is very worried. Meanwhile, in Karakura Town, we get a wonderfully atmospheric reintroduction to the life of a Shinigami, essentially, dealing with hollows on a daily basis and the danger that puts them in, as well, of course, introducing us once again to our main cast of characters in an explosive and really wonderful action set piece. It's so nice seeing Ichigo and his friends coming together and just being absolute badasses, because by this point in the story, they realistically would be. They are no longer those inexperienced school children. These guys have been through war and back, and it's really cool seeing them and their abilities really being brought to life like this. During some downtime in the world of the living, Ichigo and his friends are confronted by a mysterious new villain called Eburn Asgiaro, who seems to reveal what looks like a Quincy cross, despite the fact that he appears to be an Arrancar who then battles Ichigo. Meanwhile, there's even more strange goings-on happening in the Soul Society as Ikaku and Yumachika investigate some disappearances, while Yamamoto himself, their head captain, is confronted by new masked enemies calling themselves the WANDENREICH and declaring war on the Soul Society as his vice captain Sasakibe is impaled in the wall in front of him. All of this culminates with these villains coming back together in this mysterious icy palace cloaked in blue and coming face to face with a brand new enemy. I mean, that's a pretty awesome way to get a story going, right? There's so much happening, there are multiple storylines converging from all angles, and already we're seeing a ton of characters. I mean, how many times in Bleach's history have we had a conflict with the head captain right out of the gate? That shows you immediately that the stakes are impossibly high in the Thousand Year Blood War arc right from the very beginning. Who are the WANDENREICH? What do they want beyond declaring war on the Soul Society itself? And what interest do they have in Ichigo? And it seems like Eburn Asgiaro tries to do something to Ichigo's Bankai as well. He claims he wants to make it disappear, but it seems to fail. So already we have loads of questions that we need answering. And so yeah, I'm really impressed with the story so far and the amount of ground they managed to cover. However, the story of this episode is actually where I have my one concern, I would say. I don't think it's a negative to hold against the episode at all, but I am slightly worried. And that main worry is the pacing. They seem to be moving extremely quickly. Now, I know we have to fit the entirety of the Thousand Year Blood War into about 52 episodes, but it still seems like that means it's having to move extraordinarily quickly, and I just hope that in the future more scenes are able to be given a chance to breathe a little better than they were in this opening. But at the same time, when it comes to a story, you really need a hook in your opening chapter, or else people will turn it off, or they'll close the book or something like that. And I think this episode achieves that. And if that's what they needed to do, if that's how they achieved it, by moving quickly, by introducing all these different elements, having these different battles taking place already, I think it's worth it to get people talking about the Thousand Year Blood War. But I will just say that moving into next week, that is my one concern so far. It's not even really a negative, but I am a little worried watching them seemingly speed through some scenes quite quickly. But I'm hoping that it all evens itself out in the end and that the arc really gets the room to breathe that it actually deserves. Moving on, let's talk about how the episode looked, because it looks absolutely beautiful. We are talking movie quality animation at points here, particularly during the action sequences where everything is moving incredibly fluidly and it all looks lovely. The battle sequences, Ichigo and his friends versus the Hollows, Ichigo versus Eburn, were both lovely to behold. They looked amazing and I really did enjoy seeing them. The art, as I've mentioned in the trailer reviews and stuff like that, I think is the closest it has ever been to Kubo's own actual line art. In some places, there are other places where it doesn't look quite as crisp or quite as refined, but when you get those character face close-ups, you know, that just looks absolutely wonderful. And I think the art of this episode does a good job of conveying that tone where it really needs to. I think the atmosphere is handled excellently. You know, right at the start of this episode, you can really sense the urgency in the Soul Society, and then it changes almost effortlessly to Karakura Town, where you get a slightly more ominous and sinister feel. Something is cooking in the background, but we don't know what yet. And the Hollows, despite now being CGI, although I'm not entirely sure they were at all points, although it did kind of seem like it, are still extremely imposing. And of course, add on top of that the fact that the episode did seem to be totally uncensored, which really helps hammer home the darker and more mature theme of the 1,000-Year Blood War, and you've got the perfect recipe for something that just looks wonderful the whole way out. Personally, I am a big fan of the soft lighting being used that gives everything a more subtle glow to it, and it really helps colours pop as well. Perhaps my favourite scene in this regard was that first initial scene in Ichigo's bedroom, where all the characters come together and you can really see just how nice everything looks. And there seems to be an effort to really use considerably more dynamic visuals, dynamic lighting to help convey a more impactful scene. Whether that's that almost blood-red sunset soaking Karakura Town during the Ichigo versus Eburn fight, or of course the moody overcast greys of Soul Society, or the strange, almost angelic blues, whites and blacks of the mysterious enemy castle right towards the very end. Now, I do want to say, on top of all of this, that I can see how this new colouring style might not be to everybody's tastes. Personally, I do enjoy it, but at the same time, it is a lot all the time as well, with very little respite from that. I think perhaps the best example of how this affects the characters and the world around it, the character of Eburn as Gyaro, we never see him in a natural light setting. You never really see what he actually looks like, if you understand what I mean. His first appearance is during the golden hour of Karakura Town. Everything is brilliantly lit by this gilded orange glow, which moves on to that crimson sunset, which then moves on to the ghostly, eerie blues of the enemy palace. And so Eburn, you never really get a proper sense for what this character actually looks like from a colour scheme perspective. And as somebody who has read the entire story in black and white, I was kind of dying to see what these new characters look like in terms of their actual colours. It's really the smallest of nitpicks, and like I said, for the most part, I do love the way the new style looks, the new colouring style looks, the new lighting style looks, but at the same time, I hope there are a few scenes here and there, like the ones in Ichigo's bedroom, where they pare it back just a little bit, if only to get a better look at some of these new characters. But I do think on the whole they did a really stellar job, particularly with the atmosphere. Like, I think at the very start in Karakura, those hollows are incredibly creepy. There's a really ominous vibe to that whole scene, which is wonderfully executed. And I love as well the way the WANDENREICH characters invade Soul Society, the way they confront Yamamoto. Some really lovely shots, particularly of the front masked man with Yamamoto in his visor. It's like, as I mentioned in my live reaction, it's like seeing the WANDENREICH having Soul Society in their sights. That sort of thing is really, really clever, and I hope to see more in the future. And on top of that, I thought the voice acting in this episode was uniformly excellent, and I especially want to call out Eburn's voice actor for having not the biggest role in the episode, but really bringing it with almost every line, coming across with this almost crazed passion, particularly when he tries to affect Ichigo's Bankai with his strange ritual. I thought that was perhaps the standout scene in the entire episode. And so, as we round out this review, I want to talk about what I thought my favourite scene was, and that was the moment Ichigo's Bankai was seemingly being ripped away from him by Eburn and his spell. From Ichigo actually activating his Bankai to Eburn's insane-looking face, which was drawn so wonderfully, to the incantation in German, to the whatever that strange umbrella-like thing is where it tries to ensnare Ichigo as his Bankai is torn away from him. I thought it was all really wonderful. Eburn's voice acting and the contorted madness on his face as he finishes his spell before Ichigo breaks out of it, and then the strain in his voice as he says Getsuga Tensho. I thought that whole thing was handled really well. That whole scene was handled exceptionally well. So for me, that was my favourite scene of the episode, although realistically it could have been one of many. I thought Sasakibe being slammed into Yamamoto's office was also really nice. At the same time, I do think that scene is perhaps one of the only ones that kind of suffers from this highly accelerated pace. I do think maybe we could have lingered a little bit longer on the fact that Sasakibe was thrown into Yamamoto's office. It almost comes out of nowhere. And I know that is supposed to be how it's meant to be. It's meant to be a shock factor moment, but I think we could have had even more impact. And that being said, I do think it was handled pretty well, but I The episode did an interesting thing where it cut back and forth between Sasakibe talking to Yamamoto about their Bankai and the enemy being able to do something to it, to Eburn trying to do something to Ichigo's Bankai, and I get what they were going for, and this is all the sort of thing we can talk about a little bit more in our spoiler discussion later. But at the same time, I think doing that robs the Sasakibe scene of some of its impact, of some of its importance, I guess. But at the same time, I get what they're going for. I like it. I think it works in a sense when you're trying to bring it to life on the screen. I just wonder if maybe a little bit more time could have been dedicated to allow that Sasakibe scene to breathe perhaps a little better. So regarding the best scene of the week, let me know in the comments what was your favourite scene from this episode. I would love to know what you think down in the comments below. And can we talk briefly before we go about those end credits? That was a really lovely surprise. You may have noticed that there was no opening in this episode. I believe that's going to change since we know the opening song and everything like that. And the ending song that played this week is not the usual ending song that will play in subsequent episodes. Instead, this was a special version of the end credits, taking us back through the story of Bleach, which was honestly really nostalgic. And it's also very cool as well to see how the art style and the colouring style and all that sort of thing has really changed quite dramatically for the Bleach anime over the years. So honestly, that was a really nice surprise, and it was very nostalgic. It did kind of hit you in the feels a little bit, but I also can't wait to see what the actual opening and endings look like when they come around, presumably next week. That being said, even if you sat through the credits this week, still make sure you check out my full recap of the series from chapter 1 through to 479. And so, out of 5 stars, what's my verdict for episode 1, The Blood Warfare? Let me think about that for a second. I'm going to say 5 out of 5. I mean, could it really be anything else? I'm ecstatic that Bleach is back, and I'm not going to lie to you, objectivity is kind of out the window this week. Next week, we will be looking at the series with a more critical eye. Bleach is back, the anime is back, and that's an extremely exciting prospect. So I was really happy with the first episode of the 1000-Year Blood War arc, with only a couple of small quibbles that I wonder if will be ironed out, or if maybe I'll even just get used to over time. Let me know in the comments below what you thought about the episode, what you liked, what you maybe didn't like as much, and what score you would give it as well. I would love to know. But until next time, guys, I'll catch you later. Make sure to check out the spoiler discussion that will come later on, and if you haven't done already, I've also done a live reaction for episode 1 as well, which was an awful lot of fun. Actually getting to share my real-time thoughts and reactions with everyone. So that was a great time too. Make sure to check that video out. Make sure to stay tuned for the next video. And until next time, I'll catch you later. And I'll see you then.